Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, debate over whether Iowa should overhaul area education agencies, why some state Senate Republicans moved Governor Reynolds' plan forward while House lawmakers put the bill on pause. Reynolds says Iowa's special education system is failing students with disabilities. We sit down with the head of Central Iowa's AEA to talk about their work. And school building sales, a proposal that gives priority to charter schools over other bidders who may also want that property.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and welcome to Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Last week, subcommittees in both the Iowa House and Senate took up Governor Kim Reynolds' plan to reform the state's area education agencies, or AEAs. Those 9 agencies provide services to all kids with disabilities across the state. They also provide a variety of general education resources to Iowa's 300-plus school districts. Currently, those districts are automatically partnered with AEAs who receive all state and federal special education funding. Under Governor Reynolds' plan, school districts would get that money instead. They could continue using their current AEA, a neighboring AEA, hire more special education staff in-house, or contract with a private company instead. Instead of local boards, the Iowa Department of Education would be in charge of supervising AEAs, and the bill would also increase teacher pay. Well, just before the House and Senate subcommittees started their hearings on Wednesday, Reynolds again explained why she believes Iowa's special education system needs immediate change.
So, as we looked at the AES system and how the system was currently serving the kids, the results are unacceptable, and so we knew that we needed to realign the way that we were providing the services for students with disabilities. You can look at the scores, you can look at the NAEP scores, where over the last 5 years, students with disabilities have ranked 30th or below in 9 out of the 12 assessments. If you look at the state scores, if there's some concerns with that, our spring of this year, 2023, there was a 41% deficiency in students with disabilities. And if you point to the U.S. Department of Education, Iowa has been designated needs assistance since 2018, again based on student scores, as well as general supervision or oversight of the special education program. So we looked at the results, and that is on top of Iowa spending almost over $5,300 more per student than the national average with poorer results. So as we started looking at the system, we thought that they should focus on special education, really align their mission back to what the core mission was. We wanted to take a look at the funding and how that was being allocated, and really starting to provide the oversight through the Department of Education.
Wednesday's Iowa House subcommittee hearing allowed school administrators to speak for or against the AEA bill. That included former Iowa Education Director and now Waukee Superintendent Brad Buck. He says the bad in this AEA plan far outweighs the good.
I'm going to give you the good, bad, and the ugly of this bill, and as quickly as I can. The good of the bill, let's start with that. Raising teacher-based pay in Iowa and that of veteran teachers is a good thing. Bad things in the bill, the removal of $35 million in media services funding, the lack of clarity regarding who's responsible for what work and how it'll be paid for. And finally, an additional bad part of the bill are the timelines for implementation. They're unrealistic to the point of being irresponsible. Simply removing them also doesn't work. The downright ugly portions of this bill, the significant shift of authority from local boards to the Iowa Department of Education. Similar to the first point, the bill is proposed to take $20 million from the current system to hire 130 or more new state employees with no direct interface with students and no local accountability for the work they do. Most importantly, perhaps, is that it's incredibly likely this bill is going to create winners and losers. It's far more likely that larger districts will come out in better shape than this bill than smaller and especially rural districts.
Now, other superintendents did speak in favor of the bill. Todd Abramson with the Okoboji School District says he believes the proposal would give his schools control over the special education resources they need.
I'm here in support of the bill. I support change, and here's my rationale. For decades, I've been a superintendent for over 20 years. I've been part of 6 different districts, part of that being shared, 4 different AEAs. And as part of my colleagues and superintendents, it's always been a discussion on the flow-through dollars of the AEA and how they better could be worked, used, and spent at the local level. I'm here to represent the superintendents of Iowa, along with my colleagues. I also would say, for the ones that have been silent, you are supporting this bill because the governor's heard from us over the years on how this needs to change. Change is good. We've already started to look at what we would do with the dollars. A special ed director, a speech therapist, a behavior psychologist, so we could meet the needs every day in our district, because those needs are not being met.
Superintendents weren't the only ones weighing in. Teachers, parents, students, and education experts gave feedback on both sides of this bill.
Given the complexities of IDEA, I have grave concerns that the DE's infrastructure will be up and running by midsummer in a way that supports students across Iowa. I am grateful for the partnership Ankeny shares with Heartland, but it's vital for you to understand that as our teachers who provide academic direct instruction for students, to say that AEAs are responsible for the academic outcomes is misleading at best, and to assume that shifting the management of special education to support the Department of Education will lead to better outcomes is missing the mark entirely. The work of supporting improving student outcomes needs to happen at the school level, and asking the DE to continually approve the support and resources from the AEA is an extra step that could hinder timely services to our students.
As a parent of a child with special needs, my son has utilized the AEA services since he was 2, and we have very much appreciated those services. However, as my child has gotten older, it has become more and more of a challenge to ensure his educational needs are being met. While the AEA staff is included in my son's annual meetings, it is primarily his special education teacher who fosters much of his learning. She is the one responsible on a daily basis for providing my son his specially designed instruction minutes, which is where she works with him one-on-one at his academic level. This instruction is vital to ensure my son's success. Because of this, I support the school district who holds the most influence over my son's educational success, being the one in charge of the funding for these students.
I am here to talk about how AEA helped me. I am hard of hearing in both ears. We didn't always been hard for me. My IEP is made when I was in 1st grade. In 1st grade, AEA helped me to read, talk, and hear, and I needed to learn. In 4th grade, my audiologist bought a microphone for the teachers to wear. She made sure everyone wore it correctly. All the special for the help Carlisle and help me in different ways. There's not enough teachers for our school. How we're going to find more teachers to support the students who need help like me. AEA gives me the chance to learn. They help me help my teachers understand what I need. AEA help teachers to become better teachers. Because of helping I've gotten, I can go to college.
On behalf of the Iowa Manufactured Housing Association, obviously this is not center of the strike zone for IMHA as we're not an education association, but we are some of the larger property taxpayers in the communities in which we operate. And as a standard policy, anytime there's a good conversation about reducing the property tax burden in Iowa, we want to be a part of that and applaud those who are involved. So I would say first, clearly the governor believes there are opportunities for the AEAs to function more efficiently, and we want to cheerlead that conversation.
And these Iowans were all giving input to a panel of Iowa House lawmakers. And on that panel, one state Democrat voted against it. The 2 state Republicans chose to put the bill on pause. They said they need more discussion before they decide on the proposal.
Like many of you have said, what's the hurry to fix a 50-year-old system in 2 days or 1 week or whatever time? I mean, this has been really rushed. If there are problems, let's look at those problems and talk to the experts, not a company from Virginia, but the experts. That would be the parents, the people that spoke today, the superintendents on both sides of this issue, the teachers, the people that are in the ranks doing the work, the people that know what's going on. These people, many of them have heartfelt stories we've read on our emails. They're just very sad. So I would agree with most of you here. I would like to see us stop, slow down, take a good look at this bill, talk to the local experts, Because in the long run, whatever we do here is going to affect our children, the children that we're bringing up to look after us when we get older.
And the same bill did advance on the Senate side, although both Republican and Democratic state senators agreed the bill still needs significant changes. Governor Reynolds released this statement after it passed through that Senate subcommittee. Again, that's the very first step in the legislative process. Reynolds thanked the Senate subcommittee for allowing her bill to move forward and continue the conversation. Last week, I sat down with the governor to talk about her plan. Next on Close Up, we'll speak with the head of Heartland AEA about the bill would impact her agency.
There we go.
Yeah, would you mind just counting to 10 real quick?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Great. Did that work? Cool. They were just
Yeah.
getting a quick mic check.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Last week on Close Up, I sat down with Governor Reynolds. She shared the details of her bill to change Iowa's area education agencies and why she believes the current system is failing students with disabilities. She also spoke about why she's making reform a major priority this legislative session. Well, Heartland AEA serves students in Polk, Dallas, Story, and 7 other central Iowa counties. So I am joined today by Dr. Cindy Yellick. She's the Chief Administrator of Heartland AEA. And Dr. Yellick, maybe you could start by just giving Iowans a brief overview of what does an AEA do? What are the services that your organization provides?
All right. At a high level, AEAs are in place to support education so that we can ensure that all students and all Iowa students thrive. Since the inception of the AEAs in the mid-1970s, we've been funded in 3 areas. Probably the area that most people know about is special education, and it makes up 70 to 75% of each AEA's funding. There are currently 9 AEAs in the state. Within special education, we start serving students as early as soon as they're born, if they spend time in the NICU. A staff member from an AEA might be working with that family before they go to the hospital. And then we continue to support the student all the way through 12th grade, or some students remain eligible for services through age 21. Within that bucket of work we do Child Find, which is the evaluation process to determine if a student is entitled for special education. We also provide what we call direct and related services. So those services that are not on the instructional side, but also are needed for a child to meet their goal. So those might be speech language pathology, physical therapy, occupational therapy, audiology. So that's a myriad of those support services. Second area of funding for us would be education services. These areas are things like helping teachers in the classroom if they're implementing a literacy program, designing new math instruction. It's also professional development. Some highlights in there are areas that are heavily used are substitute authorization classes. As people are stepping up to become substitute teachers, they can take classes through the AEAs to become authorized to do that. Our third area of funding then is media and technology. This is everything from physical books that classroom teachers can check out to use with their students, to electronic resources such as ebooks and online search engines, those kinds of resources. And we also have people that help teachers implement technology into their classroom and their teaching. So that's a very high level, kind of quick overview of what we do. There's lots of services within those 3 areas, but those would give people kind of a highlight.
Sure. So I want to start with that first bucket about special education. You know, we heard from the governor. She says that based off of state and federal test scores, she says Iowa's AEAs are failing students with disabilities. She says they're underperforming. You know, as someone who's worked for a long time with Iowa's area education agencies, you know, what's your response to that?
One of the assessments that the governor cites is the NAEP test, and there are concerns across the state about using that as an indicator in high-level policy making or a tool for making high-level policy decisions. One is that the sample size of who was tested is very small, but I think the big overarching thing is the question about how do you decide if a student in special education is succeeding. I think most parents would tell you it is not a single score on a standardized assessment that tells you their child is succeeding with their support or not. It's things like how are they progressing on the goals on their IEP? How are they accessing the general education curriculum with or without support? And long term, are they ready for life after high school? Can they get a job? Can they go to college? What secondary goals do they have? And are we preparing them for them to meet those goals? So I think parents have expressed some frustration about saying we're going to make this high stakes decision on one single test score at one point in time that doesn't tell the whole story of a special education students program.
Another thing that the governor has said about her plan is that, you know, area education agencies will still be required to provide special education services if their local school district requests it. You know, however, if a school district in that AEA decides to opt out, they would take their funding with them, so that AEA would have less funding than they have originally had in years past. You know, what's your perspective on, you know, with less funding, what could potentially happen to services?
Right. I think it's important to understand that when the legislature set up the provision for area education agencies in the mid-1970s, it was really done thinking of it as a comprehensive system. So what that means is, while there's a formula that indicates how much money flows through to the AEA, and it is based on student enrollment in a district, it wasn't set up to say, and that exact amount of dollars is what it's going to take to serve special education students in that district. So there might be a year where a district has a student who has greater needs in the area or needing support from a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. If that student graduates or moves on, that district might not need that service that next year. But that service then might slide to a different district. So it isn't that they set up a system that was meant to be discrete district by district. So what this bill does is basically say, we're taking and putting that mechanism for a district to say, we're taking our finances or our money out. And then obviously that would impact that comprehensive nature of services across the state. We do have concerns that there are some districts when they received the amount of money that, or when they were told how much money they would receive for special education, and they looked at the amount of FTE have to come in and out of there, they said there's no way we can hire that. Particularly when you look at rural schools and you're looking at having to accommodate travel time or part-time staff and how you would staff that comprehensively. It's a very different model than somebody who's in an urban area. They have access to a lot of different kinds of practitioners, a lot of different therapists, those kinds of things. So we really don't think that the system, if it's piecemealed, will be as robust as it is in the current system.
These changes, you know, if this bill passes as is, would take effect, you know, starting next school year. What are your thoughts on that timeline? You know, how would that impact Heartland AEA?
Right. You heard very clearly from one of the superintendents, the timeline is fairly unrealistic. In education, we are starting the hiring season now so that people are in place by July 1. So you're looking at, if this were to go into place, every district having to figure that out by July 1, either hire personnel or figure out how many people they would need. For us as an agency, we have staff that are saying, what is the security of my job? Is this what I do? Should I be looking for another opportunity that I feel like is more stable. We have so many people dedicated, though, to students. They're really committed to the AEA system and making the system work. So it's caused a lot of uncertainty, and it's just really unknown how that's going to play out for us.
Right, because you wouldn't know how many people to retain or not until you hear from schools June 1st?
That's correct. So we wouldn't know how many staff to retain. And then there's also the issue of, in smaller districts, it's not just that there's one speech-language pathologist that's going out there. It might be that a speech-language pathologist is going to one district half-time and another district half-time. So if one district stays in and one district comes out, then you have to figure out, well, how do you do that assignment? How do you make sure that the one district has all the services they need covered? So the staffing is pretty complicated, and to say that a district will notify us on June 1 and we'll have that figured out by July 1, the start of the next year, is pretty unrealistic.
Well, there's obviously a lot of pieces to this legislation, so Dr. Cindy Ellick, we appreciate you joining us.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, still to come on Close Up, selling school property, the bill moving up in the State House that would give charter schools priority over others who want that land. Thursday, the Senate Subcommittee on Local Government held a meeting on Senate Study Bill 3112. And according to the bill's sponsor, one of the provisions would give private schools the first right of refusal to purchase public school property that is either being torn down or sold.
It's to make sure they have an opportunity to have a fair shake at acquiring that building. And so whether that's, it still needs to be fair market value, and we will continue to have that conversation, but they at least need to have a say and an opportunity to acquire that building.
And the bill received a mixed reaction from the public, who is giving their feedback. While some of them approved of the bill's intent, others feared that it would force school districts to sell some of their property for less than they could if the building was sold to the highest bidder.
And our goal is going to be to get the maximum value for whatever building we sell, and would be very concerned if we have to go to an educational institution and say, do you want to buy this? They're the ones that get to make that decision, not us. So what if the price is below what the realtor thinks is the appropriate price for that property? But they're the ones that get to decide that, and we don't get that power. So those are some of our concerns.
The Iowa Board of Regents, we're monitoring the bill. Our lawyers, attorneys have some concerns about the lease provisions and how it may limit our flexibility on dealing with public-private partnerships and how we deal.
It's not a bill we asked for, but we're definitely supportive because we've seen a couple of school districts around the state make decisions on their building sales that are not student-centered in their community, and we'd like to make sure that we don't necessarily need the first right of refusal, but what we do want to make sure is that we have access to that process just like everybody else.
And that bill did pass through subcommittee on Thursday. It now goes to the full committee, which is the second step in the legislative process. Well, coming up, some programming changes from a week from today, and that's when KCCI airs the Super Bowl. Welcome back to Close Up. Well, a quick programming note, Close Up will actually not air a week from today, and that is so KCCI can bring you our extended Super Bowl 58 coverage. That coverage starts at 10:30 with NFL Slime Time, and you can watch the Super Bowl right here on KCCI as the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers go head-to-head. Kickoff is at 5:30 on KCCI. Well, thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here. Have a great day.